All right, I think we're on 145. Last we spoke, in last week's episode, Jacob was successful in stealing the blessing from Esav, and therefore Yitzchak reiterated that he gave the blessing to Jacob. Esav finds out that he's been usurped, and Esav says, I'm going to kill him. And so Jacob's mother intervenes and sends Jacob away. Yitzchak tells Jacob to go back to his land, his mother's home, and to find a wife there. Don't take a wife here. Go back to your mother's house, to Lavan, and take a wife there. So we pick up on page 145 in the next parsha. We start a new parsha. Parshas Vayetzei. So Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He encountered the place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He took from the stones of the place which he arranged around his head, and he lay down in that place. And he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set earthward, and its top reached heavenward. And behold, angels. I told you we were going to read about angels. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, Hashem was standing over him. And he said, I am Hashem, God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac. The ground upon which you are lying, to you will I give it, and to your descendants. Your offspring shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall spread out powerfully westward, eastward, northward, and southward, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and by your offspring. Behold, I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go, and I will return you to this soil, for I will not forsake you until I will have done what I have spoken about you. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely Hashem is present in this place, and I did not know. And he became frightened and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the abode of God, and this is the gate of the heavens. Jacob arose early in the morning and took the stone that he placed around his head and set it up as a pillar, and he poured oil on its top, and he named that place Bethel. However, Luz was the city's name originally. Then Jacob took a vow, saying, if God will be with me, will guard me on this way that I am going, will give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, and I return in peace to my father's house, and Hashem will be a God to me, then this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall become a house of God, and whatever you will give me, I shall repeatedly tithe it to you. That ends the chapter. We're going to speak about a few things. We'll only have time to speak about a few, just one or two tonight. So Jacob is leaving Beersheba and he's heading towards Haran. And he encounters a place. And he lays down and he has a dream about a ladder. And everyone's heard about this Jacob's ladder. It's become a book. There's a book called Jacob's Ladder. I think there was even a play called Jacob's Ladder. Jacob has a vision of a ladder. And on that vision, he sees that the ladder is in heaven and the ladder is ending on earth. And angels are going up and down. And there are various things that I want to speak about in regards to this ladder. So the first and foremost is, why is he having this dream of the ladder and the angels? And why are the angels going up and down a ladder? Angels don't need to go up and down a ladder. Angels can just appear. We have multiple times in the Torah where the angels just appear. All of a sudden, Jacob's having this vision of a ladder. So, we are told that two things are happening here. The first thing is that Jacob is leaving Israel. Jacob is heading out of Israel and he's heading back to where his father and his mother come from. Haran, which is outside of Israel. And while Jacob was in Israel, he was having a very different experience. As a matter of fact, we spoke about this, if anyone remembers, we spoke about this by Abraham. We saw that Abraham's interaction with Hashem changed when he arrived in Israel. Prior to him arriving in Israel, it was always an interaction where God appeared as a vision. It was only once he entered Israel that now God began to speak directly to him. The interaction became much more close. Because you're in the Holy Land. Israel is called the Holy Land. What does that mean, Holy Land? Let's speak about this concept of Holy Land. What exactly is Holy Land? The word holy is kadosh. The word kadosh actually means separate. There was a horrible book written, Israeli Society, not a very nice book, and it was called Kadesha. Kadesha is a harlot, another word for a prostitute. It's the same word though. Kadosh, holy, Kadesh. Why? What's the difference? We see this word kadosh in a few places. We see this word kadosh when we speak about holiness. We see it in the mentioning of a harlot. And you know where else we see the word kadosh? Kiddushin. You don't know what kiddushin is? What's kiddushin?
Marriage.
Marriage. The word kiddushin is marriage. All three of these things have something in common. Holiness, marriage, harlotry. They actually all have something in common. And what they have in common is that they have been isolated from everything else that is in their category. When something is holy, all it means is that this entity is now been isolated, dedicated, removed from the mundane that all other items that are like it have. A woman, when you marry her, Kedushin, what does that mean? It means that this woman is now unique, has been separated. Your relationship with this woman is different than your relationship with every other woman. Same thing with a harlot. A harlot, the relationship that this woman has with intimacy is different than any other normal relationship with intimacy. Holiness, though, is something that we have to understand. What is holy? I remember when I was growing up in my parents' house, they should rest in peace, we had a living room that my parents put furniture in, and they put furniture in with the money that they got from my brothers and my bar mitzvah. I never understood how that was fair, but okay. And they brought really nice furniture. Now, I don't know what I just said to be totally true, but I just know that it seemed very coincidental that they furnished the room right after my brother had his bar mitzvah, and then they upgraded the furniture when I had my bar mitzvah. Okay. This furniture that they had in this room, though, was so nice that no one was allowed in it. It was furniture that you weren't allowed to sit on. You weren't allowed to use.
Did you have plastic wrappers around it?
No, my grandmother did.
Oh.
In her house, she had plastic wrapper. The worst. Because in summer, we'd go to visit her in shorts. Oh, you sit down on that plastic in shorts and you get up. Wow, it's amazing that a layer of skin wasn't left behind.
Wax.
Oh my gosh. That living room was holy. How was it holy? Because it was separated. You weren't allowed to use it. But that doesn't help us understand what holiness is. You see, holiness is something that is the following. Holiness is when you take something and you designate it, and that entity now is something which helps you connect to something else. That's what holiness is. Greatest example of this is Shabbos. We say Shabbos is holy. When we speak about Shabbos, you know, you're not allowed to do something called malacha, work on Shabbos. Everyone thinks you can't work on Shabbos. Do you know that if you wanted to, you could come in here on Shabbos and set up these tables like this. We could have a class on Shabbos, and then as soon as the class is finished, rearrange the room back to look like the shul. Now, how many of you think that that's work? You're picking up tables, you're schlepping tables, that's work. You might even break a sweat if the tables are heavy enough. Are you allowed to do it on Shabbos? Yes. There's no prohibition to work on Shabbos. It's the biggest misnomer there is. The prohibitions on Shabbos is something called malacha. Malacha is often ill-translated as work. But what is malacha? Malacha is the 39 categories of work that were used to build the Beis Hamikdash. That is what is prohibited on Shabbos. Nothing more, nothing less. What it took to build the Mishkan was what is prohibited on Shabbos, the temple. What in the world does Shabbos have to do with the temple? Everyone says, it's creativity. Okay. What is the greatest act of creativity in the physical world?
Procreate.
Yeah, you allowed to do that on Shabbos?
Yes.
It's a mitzvah.
Double.
So anyone who tells you it's the creative process, tell them you're mistaken. Because the greatest act of creativity is a mitzvah on Shabbos. So don't tell me it's creativity in the physical world. That's physical. The baby's going to come out from this. It's very simple. What was the temple? The temple is called the Beit HaMikdash, the house of holiness. And the rabbis tell us explicitly what does the temple mean when we say it's the house of holiness. It is the house that is different than every other house. In that when you looked at this house, by looking at that house, you were supposed to be able to connect with the Almighty. Just looking at that structure, looking at that edifice and watching what goes on inside was enough to help you connect intimately with the infinite being. Therefore, Shabbos comes along, you don't need that. You don't need a building to connect to the Almighty because you have Shabbos. I'll give you an example. My wife and I, we got engaged on a park bench in Jerusalem. That park bench became very holy to us, obviously. And for many years, some of you know I used to run a college trip to Israel. And so for many years I was going to Israel every summer without my family. That's thousands of miles away. And occasionally I would make sure, at one point each summer, I would make a point to break away from the program and go sit on my bench. Now, I'm sitting on my bench in Jerusalem. Where's my wife? Stuck here in Los Angeles. But where are we?
Together on that bench.
Right there. You follow what it means to be holy, to have a holy place that helps you connect. When you looked at that house, you felt right there with the Almighty. Sitting on that bench, I was right there with my wife. Now, let's say I had to travel, not advisable, gentlemen, but let's say I had to travel not to Jerusalem. Let's say I had to travel to Australia, and my wife was here in Los Angeles. On what day, on what point of time, while, yes, I would feel the angst of being so far apart physically, but at what point in time would I also feel incredibly connected and right there together?
Anniversary.
What'd you say?
Anniversary.
On your anniversary. Does everyone hear that? There's a point in time. There's a point in time where that time is holy. That time you can feel connected. So therefore we have holiness of time, holiness of place. When you looked at the temple, that was holiness of place. You felt connected to the Almighty. Shabbos comes along, it's holiness of time. Just being in Shabbos, you don't need the temple. Just being in Shabbos should allow you to feel connected to the Almighty. We are told that that holiness of place is not just the temple. It's the land of Israel. The land of Israel is such that when you are in Israel, you feel that connection. It's not the same connection as the temple itself, but it's a connection. It's not the same connection as an anniversary, but a birthday is... Birthday, you feel very close, but it's not an anniversary. So the land of Israel in and of itself is holy. There's a connection that doesn't exist anywhere else. And you know what that connection was through? Was through the angels. Jacob, when he was living in the land of Israel, was escorted and surrounded by angels that went with him wherever he went. But you know which angels those were? Those were the holy angels of Israel. Those angels don't leave Israel. Those angels stay in Israel. So when Jacob is about to depart from Israel, he has this dream with a ladder, and he sees angels going up and angels coming down, because there's a change of guard happening. The angels of Israel have to go up. The angels of out of Israel are coming down to escort him now. He's not going to have that same connection. Number 2, the ladder. With this, we'll finish up tonight. Jacob's ladder is not just an idea of angels going up and down. Jacob's ladder is Jacob himself. Because the angels could have just switched the guard like that. Why is it up a ladder? Because it's Jacob himself. It's Jacob's ladder. Gentlemen, you must understand this and understand this clearly. There is no plateau in life. Life is not static. There is no plane in life. P-L-A-N-E. Life is either a vertical climb or a descending. No one remains stagnant. And therefore, you are either growing or recessing in life. And therefore, if you think that you've hit a plateau, it's only because you are ignorant and naive to the reality that you are recessing in life. I shared this with you before. God forbid you have a friend who has a beautiful toddler, 3 years old, beautiful toddler, laugh, play. You come back 5 years later, and that child's still acting like a 3-year-old. Mentally is still a 3-year-old. Emotionally, psychologically, developmentally, still a 3-year-old. What would you say? It's tragedy. Sad. Child's not developing. Child develops. It's a 10-year-old. Beautiful, healthy 10-year-old about to hit the teens. Parents are freaking out because they don't even know what's about to hit them. You come back 10 years later, and that child is still developmentally a 10-year-old. What would you say?
Sad.
Sad. It's a tragedy. At what point does it stop becoming a tragedy?
Never.
20-year-old! You come back 10 years later, and they're still acting like a 20-year-old. 30-year-old. You come back 10 years later, and they're still acting 30. When did it stop becoming a tragedy?
65. 40.
Now I'll ask you the bigger question. Which is the greater tragedy? And don't answer emotionally. Stop and think for a moment. Which is the bigger tragedy? The 5-year-old that stops developing and growing because they can't? Or the 25-year-old that stops developing and growing? The 25-year-old is the bigger tragedy. While it's more emotionally painful to watch the 5-year-old, that pulls at our heart much more. But it is a bigger waste to look at a 25-year-old who just stopped growing because he could have. He's got his faculties. The 5-year-old can't. Jacob's ladder is telling us in life you are either growing or you are recessing. You never stand still on a ladder. Nobody ever stops on a ladder and says, yeah, I think I'll hang out here for a while. You're either up or down.
How do you measure that?
Huh?
How do you measure that?
That's a hard question. It takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness, but even more importantly than a tremendous amount of self-awareness, it takes a tremendous amount of humility to be able to ask someone else.
I mean, in the sense of religious, like in the sense of Judaism, it's easier because, you know, if you stop learning, you stop connecting to God. Right?
That's right.
But in the sense of just life,
so here,
how do you compare yourself?
So here you go. I will take it out of religion. I'll take it out of religion and show you that you all intuitively know this is true, and you know that you can measure it yourself if you have self-awareness. Every single one of you in your professional world knows very, very profoundly that if you are not constantly learning something new, enhancing your trade, then you are losing your edge and you will not be competitive and you will slowly fall out of the game. No different in life. If you are not constantly enhancing your personal life, enhancing your spiritual, your emotional, your psychological, and yes, your spiritual life, then you are going to slowly subside. And therefore, it takes a tremendous amount of two things. Self-awareness, to be able to look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I growing? But probably even more important, an incredible element of humility to be able to ask someone who you respect, who has an understanding of you, am I growing? What can I do to grow? Because if you don't, then it's probably very unlikely that you'll have, even with the self-awareness, the ability to correctly prescribe a means of growth. The self-awareness is to at least acknowledge I need to grow. But to prescribe the growth, that requires the humility to be able to ask someone else. Hazaku Baruch.
Rabbi.